Meow Show at the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm John Zipper, the club's Vice President of Media and Editorial, and your co-host for today. And we look forward to seeing you in person again someday at the Commonwealth Club's programs in San Francisco or elsewhere in the Bay Area. But for now, we hope you are staying safe and well wherever you are. And until we're able to see you again in person, we are doing all of our programming online. This is the latest in more than 200 online programs the club has produced in the past 5 months. You can find all of our upcoming programs, as well as audio and video from our past programs, and of course, how you can help support our program production at commonwealthclub.org. If you are watching us on YouTube or Facebook Live, you can use the chat function to post questions for our panelists, and we'll work some of them into our conversation here today. Now, I'd like to introduce Michelle Meow. She's a longtime member of the Commonwealth Club's Board of Governors and the longtime producer and host of the Michelle Meow Show. Good to see you again, Michelle.
John, thank you so much. It's good to see you, and thank you all for joining us. If you're joining us live, we want you involved and engaged in the conversation, so send us questions and we'll get them to Nikki. It's now my honor to introduce you to our guest today. Our special guest, Nikki Solis, is a 24-year veteran of the Public Defender's Office, currently assigned to Juvenile Hall. She's the youngest of 7 children and was brought to the United States as an infant. She and her family were undocumented until she was a teenager. When she was 19 in the 1980s, she came out to her family and moved to San Francisco, the beacon of gay liberation. She received a scholarship to attend UC Hastings College of the Law. Nikki has been a lifelong activist for social justice. She has served on the boards of the ACLU of Northern California, Women Defenders, and La Raza Lawyers Association. She was a member of Mayor Newsom's Criminal Justice Court Steering Committee and is currently serving on the State Bar Criminal Law Advisory Commission after being appointed to it by Governor Brown. Let's welcome Nikki to the program. Nikki, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, John. Good morning, Michelle. Just a few corrections. The advisory commission I'm no longer on the board because it's now defunct. So they've changed the rules there, and I was appointed by the Board of Governors.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that clarification. We've had you on before, and so I think it was part of your bio. But that's the great thing about our leaders here, especially in the Bay Area, is the bio changes and it adds, and you keep on doing so much great work in the community. I think we should expand on that. It was just this morning that I got the opportunity to read a little bit more your piece on Medium.com about immigrating to the States, but also meeting your idol. Let's start there and get to know you before we talk about who. My family brought me here. When my mom and dad, we came 7 kids and my aunt. I actually have a picture in the background at the train station, the L train in the South Bronx. My older brother is missing in that photo, but all of us are otherwise in there. And we were undocumented. We came here, and the story on Medium is about Tom Seaver, my childhood idol, who was the heart and soul of the New York Mets, the franchise as they call them. And it so happens that on Sunday, I told my kids, Sunday the 30th, the anniversary of our arriving in New York was the 31st. So I said, I really want to write this piece about arriving here and the significance of it during 1969, the Miracle Mets. Even though I was 1, I want to explain how I came to be loving this country and being part of the fabric. And it turns out that I wrote the piece and published it on the 31st to find out that Tom Seaver had died that same day. So it was very sad, but I was glad that I could at least share my story. Thank you so much for sharing it, and we'll dedicate the program in memory of Tom Seaver today and to the American dream. And so with that being said, let's jump into our conversation. You wrote another article on USA Today, very quickly, very viral, especially because it came after the announcement that presidential candidate Joe Biden has picked Senator
Kamala Harris as his vice presidential candidate. And of course, the discussion has been going on ever since Senator Harris even ran, herself as president. But this discussion around her being a prosecutor, a top cop, and some controversy around that. But your piece was really centered around the facts that you worked with her even as a public defender. She's a prosecutor. Some would say that you both worked on the opposite sides, but you're able to come through in the article to state that she actually, in your opinion, would be the most progressive prosecutor at the time in the state of California. Let's start there.
Yeah, well, 10 or 15 years ago, most, if not all, prosecutors and district attorneys in California were in a race to the bottom to see who could be toughest on crime without regard to the systemic racism and the systemic failures of the criminal justice system. And Kamala Harris simply wasn't in that race to the bottom. She came out, she opposed and got elected and opposed Terrence Hallinan, who's a very progressive DA. But Senator Harris had a different way of going about it. She said, we don't have to be tough on crime. We have to be smart on crime. And so I met her several times. I talked to her several times. And I really liked Terrence Hallinan. I loved his policies. I loved how progressive he was. But at the same time, what Senator Harris was saying when she was running for office was something different in the sense of she will implement these alternatives to programs, and she will do it in a very efficient way. Now, we actually disagreed on a lot of things. My then boss, Jeff Adachi, who has since passed away, he led the charge in trying to get programs implemented and having alternatives to incarceration. But it can't be denied that then DA Harris actually supported and implemented many of the programs that we put forward as public defenders. I was in management. I walked through the Tenderloin with Senator Harris, with Jeff Adachi, with Governor Newsom, and other department heads to establish the Criminal Justice Center. We did a tour of several office spaces and potential places to establish that court that still exists. And it's an alternative to incarceration and an alternative to felony convictions with wraparound services.
That's a really interesting part of it. And I'm hoping you can go into that a little bit more, because we've heard occasionally other people in different jurisdictions around the country talk about this kind of an approach. Explain more about exactly what this center does and why it's important that people don't have those convictions, felony convictions, or, how this is, I assume, seen as a more successful way of dealing with the underlying problems.
Well, the interesting part is it was spearheaded by Governor Newsom because a lot of the merchants in the Union Square area were frustrated with the petty thefts, with other so-called quality of life crimes. And so it came about through that Union Square Merchants Association. I actually went to one of their meetings back in the day. I believe Paul Henderson, who was then in the DA's office, came along with me. But what then Mayor Newsom did was he learned of a model in New York, the Red Hook model in Brooklyn, called Community Justice Center or Community Courts. And we work with the Center on Court Innovation in order to establish CJC in San Francisco. And we, as public defenders, pushed back on it because it was originally a quality of life court where they were trying to model it after a New York court, Red Hook, Brooklyn, and the Mid-Manhattan Criminal Justice Center, where the laws are different in California. So we had to push back and actually advocate for crimes, felony crimes, to get into the court. And we pushed hard for that. And Jeff Adachi pushed hard for that. It's important for folks to know that in San Francisco, as liberal as we may be, there still is a disparity as far as race with regard to incarceration. We have 3 to 4% of African Americans in San Francisco, but African Americans make up over 60% of those incarcerated in the county jail. And so we still have a problem. And I think that Kamala wanted to address that problem. And the point of having wraparound services is that if folks have a mental health issue, if they have an issue with regard to housing, if they have an issue with regard to addiction, if they are just struggling and it leads them to this place, we need to do something to get them out. And so that is what we were striving for as far as creating a community court.
Staying on, being smart on crime, and that being kind of the attitude at the time. She also has publicly spoken up about, making changes within the system. And so do you see, this example of her efforts to reduce the felony charges as related to marijuana related crimes at the time? Do you see that kind of, maybe that was part of her inner workings of being or setting herself apart from the actual system?
Yes. I mean, there is no doubt that she had a progressive approach. I'm not the only one who can say these things. I think the op-ed was helpful to people because I was on the opposing side. And so I have no interest in, not telling the truth about what was occurring at the time she was district attorney. And I don't have any affiliation with the campaign. But there are a lot of district attorneys who were in the administration who can speak on these issues. And they will tell you, Tim Szilard, as I said, Paul Henderson, they will tell you all the programs that they implemented. Latifah Simon, who's, I believe she's an elected official. She's on the BART board. She ran the youth court that was known as Mentor Court. And she can speak to how Kamala moved through the system and actually supported and implemented these plans. And it's important to note that, a lot of times we put the white hat on the prosecutor and we say, look, these are the people who are doing good in society. But that wasn't necessarily the case, at least not in my opinion. When you incarcerate people, and mostly people of color, at a disproportionate rate, I think it's a major problem. So what I think what we need to do is, sure, we need to be critical of our leaders. We need to actually hold them accountable. And I think the other narrative that was being told was, valid. You want to be critical of your leaders, but at the same time, I think you have to make sure that you give the whole context. And as far as marijuana cases, I remember talking to a reporter for a lengthy period at the San Jose Mercury News, and I believe I got maybe 1 or 2 lines in the entire article. But what we were talking about was how she would reduce these possession for sale of marijuana cases to simple possession. So when people look at the record and when people look at the statistical data, sure, you will see simple possession cases, but those were basically alternatives to folks having felony convictions for possessing marijuana. And as far as simple possession of marijuana, and I don't mean to get too granular here, those cases, if you had a little bag or something, a dime bag or something of weed, you're not going to get prosecuted in the criminal courts during that time period. And I think that was something that was very unique to San Francisco. And sure, it started with District Attorney Terrence Hallinan, but it continued. And those people who were in power in the district attorney's office can speak to that as well. They didn't prosecute simple possession cases of marijuana when 11357B cases. The example I gave is the dime bags.
She did make an effort to focus on violent crime and gun involved crimes. And at least from some reading I was doing, the conviction rate went up during her time. So it's kind of interesting when you were kind of looking at some of the national political arguments over her, where, the Trump administration hasn't, or the Trump campaign, I should say, hasn't been clear how they want to try to focus on her. When she was first announced as Biden's running mate, she was seen. They were at the same time saying she's, weak on crime, but she's a former prosecutor. She's pro-cop. They were trying to, I guess, see what was going to actually kind of, throwing the spaghetti against the wall, seeing what would stick. Is the higher conviction rate that she was able to get, in particular on the homicides and violent crimes, was that a result of being able to clear the deck of some of those other things that shouldn't have been up at that level, or was she a better prosecutor, or what? I mean, can you talk a bit about her conviction rate for violent crime?
Well, I always think that measuring conviction rates as a success of a prosecutor, as the bar, is very dangerous. I think that when you take a step back and you consider that a prosecutor's job is not to win, it is to do justice. And so to actually look at a prosecutor's record, such as Senator Harris's when she was DA, and actually extract from that something positive is dangerous. It sets this precedent that the numbers matter. Numbers shouldn't matter when it comes to criminal justice, except in the way of statistical data to see if you're disproportionately incarcerating people and you're disproportionately incarcerating people of color or one group or another. When we talk about a prosecutor being a politician, I think the measure is what programs have they instituted, and did the crime rate go down? You see Chesa Boudin, he's getting a lot of flack from the right, but at the same time, he is clearly being effective because the crime rate is dropping in San Francisco. The statistical data shows that. Definitely the public defender's office has a great deal to do with that fact. We have social services program. We have a lot of programs in place. So I think when you look at a prosecutor's record, you should consider how they work with the public defender's office, with the defense bar, with the courts to find alternatives, and whether or not crime rate is reduced rather than conviction rates, because then you get into a dangerous area where you start putting emphasis on guilt rather than justice. So they can, on the Trump side or whomever, they can do whatever they want as far as their campaign. But I think that people ought to realize that if you want change, and you want change as far as social justice, if you want to see what happened to George Floyd never happen again, you have to consider alternatives to incarceration. You have to consider holding police officers accountable and police departments accountable. You have to consider funding a public defender's office that will actually be on the front lines in the fight for social justice, because this is the civil rights issue of our time, right? And so we're marching in the streets after George Floyd, but we've been on the front line fighting for alternatives to incarceration. We've been on the front line holding police accountable. And I think that's very important, especially in this time, to make that point.
So now we're diving deeper and deeper into the conversation. And I'll tell you, even doing some of my reading, going through notes and history in California and the senator's position on certain issues that we're talking about now, I think we all can admit that it gets complex. and that's okay. Life is complex. But on the issue of, say, for example, right, if we want much more progressive policies and ideas, the times have changed. In today's environment, the political unrest that we talk about, the protests that are happening that after George Floyd's his death in a police involved incident, we're talking about defunding police. But I'm hesitant to use defunding because I think most of the activists who are calling for defunding police are actually talking about redistributing funds so that we have much more holistic programs and an approach to some of the issues that we face, and not necessarily having to call on police all the time. But if we look at, the senator's record, moving from being a prosecutor and then serving as the attorney general, and now as a senator and then a vice president candidate, she certainly has evolved, I guess is a right term to say that. So when we go back to even discussions around her serving as attorney general, there's a lot of controversy around her reactions or non-reactions to police shootings at the time. And I think that we have to be careful and not just, to kind of pull back and do some critical thinking around maybe the decisions that she's made. So, for example, some may say that she didn't move quickly enough or didn't do enough regarding police shootings at the time she served as attorney general. Whereas, if you look at Mario Woods' case, I think that she was being calculated, strategic. She wanted local district attorneys to have some decision making with regards to police shootings, but at the same time, it did do some inner workings when the case of Mario Woods came up. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the evolution piece of it and how these conversations can be complicated. They can exist at the same time. And how okay that can be. And I think that it's natural to do this as you move in your career.
I think that it's important for folks to know that when Senator Harris was district attorney, she didn't prosecute the death penalty. And while there may have been shortcomings and there's valid criticism, I think what we have to look at is, does that politician walk the walk or just talk the talk? And like I said, there's valid criticism, and I'm trying to make sure that the narrative is complete because I do have hard facts and hard data on her establishing, the girls' safe house for kids who are trafficked, for young girls who are trafficked in prostitution. And she clearly didn't prosecute for death on a case where she sought life without possibility of parole for a young man who shot a police officer, and the police officer tragically died. I think that you have to look at whether or not they stood strong in the face of a lot of pressure. And she did that. And so while we may have had disagreements, even when she was DA, we had a lot of disagreements about policies and how to move forward and how to make San Francisco better, safer, but also not to disproportionately incarcerate people. She listened. And there were times where she implemented programs and policies that other DAs would never have done.
Specifically on the issue of police conduct and or police reform, what's her record there? Did she implement anything then? How did she work with the police chief and the police department when she was a prosecutor?
Well, part of the reason why I wrote the piece is because I read a piece where they had quoted, I'm not even going to say his name, the former president of the POA, who has spouted, ideas that are consistent with white supremacists. So he said something about Senator Harris being a friend of the police officers. Well, that's his opinion. And I think that there are issues with regard to police officers associations having a lot of influence politically. And, prosecutors do shy away from prosecuting cases that they ought to involving police officer shootings because of that political pressure and that support. And I think that we need reform in that regard. But as far as Maria Woods, no, she didn't intervene. And that was a tragic situation that should never have happened. And the city accepted liability for it. But there wasn't a criminal prosecution, and she had the power to do something about it. But I think that there's a lot of change now. I think that there's a new movement in the wake of George Floyd. And I don't think that it's necessarily changing police departments or the use of excessive force or the killings of young people of color. But what it is changing is the conversation. And when you see what Senator Harris is saying now, as far as this awakening, I think it's significant because you have people in the suburbs marching. You go to Pacifica, you go to, the East Bay in these towns and cities, Walnut Creek, and you see Black Lives Matters posters on their windows that you would never have seen before. So I think that there's an awakening in the United States. Do I think that there's a counter to that awakening that involves white supremacy? Absolutely. But she is evolving in the sense that she is saying the things that people need to hear. And she's in a position of power. So that's very important for her to take a hard stand on police accountability.
And staying on, we can have these complex conversations because it is complex. You have the president, currently out there in the news talking about, a Biden presidency along with Kamala Harris would be a kind of like this anarchist land, and it would be chaos, and it would definitely not be law and order. But yet you have, I think out of the three, between the president, the vice president, and the senator, you have someone who actually understands law and order, in my opinion, at least. And so let's talk about, why, and I would assume that, you writing that piece and setting the record straight, you do feel that, Senator Kamala Harris is, a great candidate for vice president, can serve this country, can bring us together with regards to a conversation around even, criminal justice reform and what safety means for all Americans.
Of course, if you're on the front lines as she was, she was a prosecutor. She saw what was going on. She was a prosecutor in Alameda. She was a prosecutor in San Francisco. I don't think that necessarily gives somebody the credibility or the qualifications to be vice president or president of the United States. But I think as who she is, as she moved through her career, I think she's demonstrated a lot of knowledge and a lot of forward thinking that's important, especially in this time. And when you have an African-American woman in that position who has the experiences that she has, I think she brings realness to the table. And that's what's important. When you look at what she was saying 10 to 15 years ago, about being smart on crime, when you consider she wasn't in that race at the bottom, when you consider she supported and established behavioral health court, she supported and established the criminal justice center, and she implemented a lot of other programs like the youth adult court program that I spoke about that Latifah Simon headed. You have to understand that she was far and above before her time. And of course, she stood on the shoulders of others, such as Terrence Hallinan, who's progressive, and Jeff Adachi, who actually pushed for these programs. But you also have to understand that she didn't have to adopt them. She didn't have to implement them. She didn't have to support them. She didn't have to create them, but she did, because she had an understanding as an African American person in that time that other district attorneys didn't seem to have. And is that important? Absolutely. It's critical, because in this time, we still have a lot of disparity in treatment in the criminal justice system, and we need change.
Here in the Bay Area, we, of course, have seen Kamala Harris for a long time in a number of roles, and in a number of different venues and things like that. I think nationally, she probably kind of broke into a lot of people, the consciousness of a lot of folks at that Senate hearing with then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And she particularly was trying to pin him down on his claim about something being a policy. And she just went after him in, I thought, an incredible way, because she was not being mean to him. She was not making stuff up. She was not throwing charges. She wasn't doing the kind of showboating that you often will see in those sessions. She was literally saying, okay, you said X, Y, Z. Where does it say X, Y, Z? Oh, you said this took place, people talked about this. When were those meetings? Where did those meetings take place? Who was in the, it was really clear thinking. And of course, he could not handle it. It was rather fun, certainly for Jeff Sessions critics to watch. But what I'm kind of getting at is, you've seen her for a number of times, and you've worked with her and around her. Is that her mind? I mean, when she's going at, approaching a problem, is it that meticulous and clearly well thought out? And does she actually know everything she needs to do? Because it really, in that session, that was kind of the first time even it clarified for me. She seems really, really smart.
Sharp. And
yeah,
she's a trial lawyer, and you have to be able to cross-examine witnesses in order to be effective. The very first time I met Senator Harris was during a trial, and right after a trial, she was prosecuting, and Tony Serra, who's a very famous criminal defense attorney, was the defense attorney in the case. And I went to watch some of the trial to see Tony Serra in action, and I saw Kamala Harris in her prime, and it was pretty impressive. And I saw her closing argument. I never wish a prosecutor well after a trial, and I didn't in that instance. But I did meet her at the cafe there, and we talked a little bit about who she was. And I said, "Oh, I saw you in trial," and I, like I said, I never wish a prosecutor luck. So there are these defining lines. But when you see somebody perform in that way and they're effective, you kind of take note, And as a defense attorney, you definitely want to say, I want to go up against that person because I think that person is competent, and then it'll really keep me on my toes and it'll make me a better lawyer. But she was sharp. She decimated Sessions. I remember what you're talking about. And it was a cross-examination. There was impeachment there of that witness. And it was very interesting to watch, because when you watch these hearings, what you hear are politicians grandstanding a lot and having this preamble to their question that ultimately is irrelevant and falls flat. It's more about them proselytizing, if you will. But in that sense, when she conducted that examination, it was a good cross-examination. And I think that when you are a trial lawyer, you think a little bit differently, and you want to make sure that you figure out whether or not that person is a truthful witness. And in so doing, you have to be very tactical, and you have to be stealth in some way. And I think that she did a great job there. And the point being is that when you have that kind of training, I think you know how to judge a situation. You know how to get something out of somebody or figure things out in a way that the person doesn't really know you're doing. So I think it's a very high level skill that will serve her well.
For joining us live. Send us questions if you'd like and join in on the conversation. Nikki, I think a few things people can't get over, or they really probably would like the senator to address it. And it becomes, and it continues to become part of the conversation of why she's a great candidate or she's not. And the few things are, the truancy policy that criminalized or penalized Black mothers for children who are not in school, handling of some wrongful conviction cases that keeps coming up, and I think also, with regards to the marijuana cases, although we're getting a different perspective that you've talked about and how she may have handled the cases, I think maybe even her position on legalizing marijuana, keeps also coming up. And so the question is, do you think that she does need to address the folks who, really want to hear from her with regards to this, even if it's, maybe that was a bad decision or a bad policy that I upheld, but we're moving forward, we're moving on, and here's where I've evolved with regards to criminal justice reform. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think that folks should have their concerns assuaged to the extent that it can be. But here's the thing. What about the vice presidential candidate for Hillary Clinton? Do we remember who he was? Tim Kaine? No one really examined his record very closely. On Twitter one day, I said, look, if you don't know who this guy is, then here's the Harvard implicit bias study if you're dragging Kamala in this period of time. Because I didn't hear anybody talking about his record or his qualifications. He's a straight white male. That may have made the difference because of Kamala's groundbreaking selection and being an African American woman and a South Asian woman. But the problem is, we can say, look, we're examining her record more closely because this is a groundbreaking thing. This is an important time. So what we're saying essentially is, because she's a woman of color and this is new, which it shouldn't have been, but it is to us, we're going to scrutinize her more. Well, there's no clearer form of discrimination or treating someone unequally than, having them have to answer questions that someone similarly situated did not have to answer to. So to the extent that she can, and to the extent that people are critical of her and want answers as members of the public, as voters, of course, they're entitled to answers. But I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we scrutinizing her more than the presidential candidate at this point in time? Why are people scrutinizing her so closely? And absolutely has to do with the fact that she was a prosecutor, she's a woman of color, and she should have a consciousness about the criminal justice system. And perhaps they feel her record didn't show that consciousness. But I'm here to say that I disagree based on my personal experience, that she did have a consciousness. And were there things that she did that we didn't agree with? Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the articles and they talk about the crime lab scandal, yes, it was a scandal. The prosecutor should have turned over evidence that they didn't. But you don't hear the full narrative of what she did in the wake of that scandal. What she did was she formulated a unit, an integrity unit, in order to examine those cases and to remedy the wrong that was committed. And a lot of those cases got addressed, and we created remedies along with the public defender's office. She worked with us, and we created remedies that way. And so cases were dismissed, cases were reduced, and it was an examination of over 1,000 cases. But you don't hear people talking about that. You hear people talking about the controversy. And I do want to say that now with Chesa Boudin, he has a different integrity unit that Christine DeBerry and George Gascon formed. But it's important for prosecutors to be held accountable. It's important for them to have an integrity unit. It's important for them to have police accountability. And if they don't, it's important for them to know that as they climb up the political ladder, they will be held accountable. So do I sit here and decry the criticism? No, because it holds these folks accountable. You should not be able to get ahead in a political system stepping on the backs of people, particularly poor people, disenfranchised people, people who are dispossessed, and people of color. So if people think that, then they ought to scrutinize and they ought to have answers to those questions.
When we're talking about criticism that she's receiving and focus that she's receiving, like you said, that, isn't directed at, Tim Kaine, or I don't even remember who John Kerry ran with, could have been you, could have been, I don't know. I really honestly don't remember. But obviously you expect the Republicans to target, the lead candidates on the ticket. Is there, when you're generally looking at criticism that's going at her and close examination and critical examination, do you see a lot of it coming from the left, or is it all kind of, Republican campaign stuff?
I do see criticism on the left, and that's why I wrote the piece, because I thought that it wasn't a fair assessment and it didn't give a full context, and it didn't really do justice to her record. But as far as Republican criticism, I don't think they know what to do, because right. If they criticize her for the progressive programs, then, they're going to rally the left. And if they criticize her for being, soft on crime, I don't think that they have much of a record there to support that. So I think they're sort of in a bind with her. And so that's why the president is just mimicking her, mocking her name and mispronouncing her name, because that's pretty much what they have going for them. But I think John Edwards might have been the vice presidential candidate for Kerry. I don't know, but that's my guess. But it makes the point, right? Is that we are scrutinizing her in a way that's pretty unprecedented. But that's okay, because we do, as a public defender, it was hard for me to come out and write the piece, because I feel like, why should I defend a prosecutor at all? But I did feel, to some degree, a civic duty to put that out into the universe. And the piece actually came out the day before she was selected. And I sent the piece to USA Today, and within 15 minutes, they said, we want to run the piece. And so they ran it, I believe that the day before she was selected. And the point of it was, silly me thinking, people ought to know that, her full record, and God forbid, the selection is made or not made because of what's out there that was, I wouldn't say false, but it didn't tell the entire story of her as a prosecutor in the district attorney's office in San Francisco. It didn't give all the positives. It didn't talk about the sex trafficking work that she did, the human trafficking work that she did with young girls.
Michelle mentioned at the beginning, you're not affiliated with the Biden-Harris campaign. Have you heard from the Biden-Harris campaign after your op-ed in USA Today?
I did, but not in any substantial way. But, folks, I think what happened on Twitter was significant, I think, enough for folks to get the conversation started. And I think just yesterday, I think I saw that Donna Brazile had posted it way back when, and I had never seen it, and a few others. But the correspondence was pretty much between me and USA Today, but I did have a conversation with her press secretary, or her now press secretary.
You're right. Now I do remember. I remembered sharing the USA Today article the day before the announcement, and the response was very interesting within 24 hours. And so when I posted it, it was progressive folks who were, no, absolutely not. And it was just an informational post. I didn't have a comment about it either way. It was just like, oh, here's another perspective. And I know we had you on the program when you were running for judge, and I know that you're a public defender, progressive as heck, and an LGBTQI person of color, immigrant, all these things. It's just another perspective. But then the next day it was announced, and then you slowly started to see people sharing the article, sharing the article. Then you were on Rachel Maddow's program, and then Democracy Now! What's been the response, other than light response from the Biden-Harris team, but especially from your the progressive colleagues, the progressive camps, to your article? Because I think that started a big conversation around pulling us all in to the actual conversation and being pragmatic and realistic about Senator Kamala Harris's record, and that this election is incredibly important, and we have a lot to focus on, and we have to be focused. So be interested to hear kind of what the left maybe has said to you, or what the response has been.
The left were not so happy, but that's my assessment. It was, let me just leave it at, it was controversial. But they know who I am. I am a public defender, and I am proud to be a public defender. So for it to come from me, I think it was important, as you said, because I do have a track record of being very progressive, and I do wholeheartedly stand by the peace and believe in the peace. As far as folks who are progressive or folks who are defenders, they challenge me. So be it. I am telling the part of the narrative that hasn't been told, and I don't think it could be denied. I did statistical data for my office. I worked several years in management. I went to meetings with Kamala Harris as DA. I know what I'm talking about. And honestly, I felt there was no one else who was in that position, because unfortunately, Jeff, who's my mentor, whom I loved, passed away. And I felt if someone there could actually speak to it from the other side and let people know what was going on, it would be important. Did I get a lot of criticism? Absolutely. Was it deserved because of ideology or politics? I guess so, because it, like I said, even in the piece, I said, it's hard to defend a prosecutor. Every district attorney has incarcerated people in this city and county who were disproportionately targeted because of race. Like, we can't deny there's racism in the system. So that's what was hard and very difficult for me. But then there were other people on the left who had left the office, who were very encouraging, very supportive. And then there were others colleagues who were very supportive and very gracious about it. And there were DAs DAs and former DAs who knew me, who contacted me and said, I can't imagine how hard this is for you to do. And they thanked me for doing it because they know who I am. I have tried over 50, probably over 60 trials in my career. I've mentored young lawyers. I have tried many juvenile trials. I've represented thousands of people. I am an aggressive defense attorney. And so people know who I am. But for some others, I understand that they might not forgive me for standing up and speaking the truth because they might have a personal opinion on a prosecutor being elevated at that level. But, Senator Harris she's a senator, and she left her mark on San Francisco that I think were, by and large, groundbreaking as far as behavioral health court, as far as CJC, as far as the youth adult court. And so I think that needs to be acknowledged, despite the fact that we disagreed. We were in the streets as public defenders marching at the Hall of Justice when her managing attorney for the misdemeanor unit wanted to change the diversion guidelines. And we fought back. And people remember that. And of course, they remember how much we had to fight for these types of programs. So maybe they don't appreciate it. But I don't have any regrets whatsoever. I believe that in speaking the truth, it's important and it's the right thing to do.
One of the biggest things that I saw people from the left were criticizing her for when she was running herself for president last year. Actually has a Commonwealth Club connection in a way. And that is at a Commonwealth Club program, there's a video of her talking about this truancy program where parents of chronic truant students could be fined and or jailed. And that video clip has been, was shared just all over the place, as you can imagine. So I want to kind of go into two things. One is, from what I'm reading about it, it sounds like, no one was ever actually jailed under it. There were some fines, but there was a lot of working with parents to get them into, compliance programs or whatever to get their kids back into school. Do you know anything about that? And was that a result of pushback maybe from the public defender's office, or was that her intention anyway, that she wasn't hoping to put people into prison? She was hoping to, focus this on it because, as she was saying, these are kids who are, who desperately need that education to get them so they don't end up in kind of the school to prison, industry pipeline.
Well, if you don't want kids to be in the pipeline of school to prison, I don't think the proper approach is prosecuting their parents whether the kids are not going to school. So I think that there's an inherent problem with taking a criminal justice approach to a socioeconomic problem. I have worked at juvenile hall very, very many years ago, and I work there now. And there's no justification for the criminal prosecution of parents with regard to truancy. There just isn't. There has to be a different way. We're not serving our communities. If kids don't want to go to school, we're doing something wrong. I don't think it's necessarily the parents, okay? And I think that there are a lot of inequities in the public school system that I can go on and on about. I do recall getting truancy calls as a parent and being very annoyed by them. And, and at one point my dad was dying and I took one of my kids to say goodbye, and I'm getting truancy notices or calls, and I told them where to go. So, I'm empowered. I'm a lawyer. I have the wherewithal to fight back and not to, be disabled by these types of accusations or calls, or, some people call it harassment. I'm all for the criticism of that. Was anybody ever incarcerated in San Francisco by Kamala for truancy? I believe the answer is no. Okay. I've done the research. I've asked I'm not going to say that, but you can go to the courts. You can ask the presiding judge of the family courts, and you will see that no one has been incarcerated for, no parent has been incarcerated for a child being truant in San Francisco. Did she seem to support that endeavor? Yes. Was it misguided? Yes. In my opinion, it was. And if people want to say she shouldn't be vice president and Mike Pence ought to be because of that press conference or that video, then more power to them. I strongly disagree because I think there are more important points, such as a woman's right to choose, and getting this president out of office. That's more important than a truancy law that was misguided. And I believe that she has said that she no longer supports that.
Well, I can't believe it. We've already spent about an hour, talking about this, and thank you so much for going in depth, because even in the Democracy Now! Or the Maddow segment, I wanted to hear more about your experience, the facts, the Kamala Harris that you worked with. So with that being said, I mean, she is the vice presidential candidate under Joe Biden's ticket, and I think for some of us who are looking into ahead of the election, there are some hopes and there are some thoughts about how we want to move forward in this country. How do you see what a Biden-Harris administration or leadership? How do you see that shaping out? What impact do you want to see immediately? I think you alluded to, there needs to be some change. And so for someone like yourself, a public defender, a parent, a citizen of the United States who's impacted by a pandemic, all these things, how do you see a Biden-Harris, presidency?
I believe it's essential. We have to address climate change. We have to address income inequality. We have to address racism in the criminal justice system. The current administration, they have no interest in these matters. They don't have any interest in science. With regard to COVID, we know now, based on the Woodward book, how diabolical the approach was, and it's not just misguided; it's diabolical. And people talk about climate change and an existential threat. COVID is an existential threat at this moment to this country, and we need leadership, and we need honesty in government, and we need openness in government. And we have a corrupt administration. I mean, it's mind-boggling and staggering what is going on in the White House. And for the way I see it is, this isn't about Trump anymore. This is about an ideology of white supremacy at all costs. They will continue to support him or anyone who espouse these ideas. So the idea is larger, I think, than Trump. Trump is just a symbol of these crazy ideas. And we are in a desperate situation where you have celebrities talking about not voting. And these are, some have millions and millions of followers. And I just don't understand how people don't see that we are our democracy is being threatened by this administration. And it's frightening to me. It's frightening what's going on. And I think that it would be a complete and total reversal when Biden and Harris get into office. And I say when, I'm very, very hopeful of that. And I have to say, I did win a $100 bet in 2016 that Trump would win. So, but I think that this time around, he will lose. But there's a threat of voting irregularities and all those things. So I think we need to come out strong as the progressives really need to rally and understand that we are a force as well. There are more of us on the far left than there are on the far right. and we are more principled. So we might want to sit it out, or we might want to not vote on principle. But I think that would be a grave mistake.
This was not the point of your article, but maybe it's a fun question. Assuming she is the new Vice President of the United States, do you have any suggestions for Governor Newsom as to who should fill her seat until the next election?
I definitely believe that Governor Newsom needs to select somebody. I say that because when you look at the Senate and you see the makeup, the statistics are abysmal. Senators, even in the history of this country. So I think that we really need Governor Newsom to step up and select somebody from the African American community in order to make sure that the voices of everyone is heard. And I think that right now, in this time, with regard to what's happening in the criminal justice system, what's happening as far as this awakening of racism that's systemic in our country, we need somebody who is woke. We need somebody who understands these issues and who are going to call it as it is in the Senate. And you're not going to get that from just anybody. You need a strong voice for this community.
Nikki, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to be with us at the Commonwealth Club and on the program, and for sharing your thoughts. I think these types of conversations are extremely important wherever your position, whatever it is, but to offer perspective and experience and truth, so that we can make an informed decision come November 3rd. So hopefully there is a party. We're celebrating, in a massive way, November 3rd, and a party at your house. Maybe?
No, virtually perhaps, but
That's right.
My kids don't go out, and neither do I, not much. I go to court, and that's about it.
Oh, thank you. See, parent, you need a parent, you need a parental person, like Nikki around to keep you grounded. Thank you all for joining us here on the program. We have lots more programming coming up, and you can go to commonwealthclub.org for the full schedule, and we'll leave John to the last words. You're on mute.
Just wanted to repeat the thanks to you, Nikki. Thank you for joining us, and to all of you watching and listening to us. In fact, we've got a program tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time with Michelle and I, and we're going to be talking with Joshua Wong from Hong Kong, talk about democracy and endangered. So we hope you can join us for that program too. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.